Melissa Roberts thought she had everything: a perfect family, a loving husband, and a beautiful daughter. But when she crossed a line with her daughter's boyfriend, her life spiraled into a nightmare. Grace, her once trusting daughter, uncovered the truth about her mother's secret affair, and the consequences were devastating. Now Melissa must face the ultimate choice: protect the family she has left or lose everything for the love of a man who was never hers to keep. The Roberts family appeared to have it all. James and Melissa Roberts were the picture-perfect couple, living in a spacious suburban home surrounded by well-manicured lawns. They were the kind of couple everyone admired: the successful lawyer and the respected schoolteacher, both devoted to their teenage daughter, Grace. Their life seemed enviable, stable, and happy. Their friends and neighbors often marveled at how they had it all together, how their marriage seemed flawless, their family picture-perfect. But behind the pristine facade, things were far from perfect. Over the years, Melissa had grown disillusioned with her marriage. James was a loving husband, but their relationship had grown routine and distant. Their once passionate connection had fizzled out, leaving them more like roommates than lovers. They had drifted apart, and Melissa found herself longing for something more. That's when Tom Harris came into the picture. Tom was the same age as their daughter Grace, a charismatic 19-year-old with a charming smile and an easy way about him. He was Grace's boyfriend, a young man with dreams of becoming something more, someone ambitious and full of life. To everyone around them, Grace and Tom's relationship seemed like the usual teenage romance. They were inseparable, always laughing together, sharing moments of teenage innocence. However, no one realized the dangerous secret that was beginning to form in the background. At first, Melissa didn't think much of Tom. He was just a boyfriend, after all, someone she saw occasionally when he visited their home. But as time went on, she began to notice him more. There was a certain spark in his eyes, an intensity that made her heart race. Tom began to pay more attention to her, his glances lingering just a little longer than necessary. The flirtation was subtle at first, just small gestures and glances that Melissa ignored at first. But soon it became undeniable. There was something between them, something neither of them had expected but both felt. What started as innocent flirting soon turned into something far more dangerous. Melissa had never considered herself the type of woman to have an affair. She was a mother, a wife, and someone who prided herself on doing the right thing. But Tom made her feel alive again. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. The attention, the thrill of the forbidden intoxicated her. Her marriage to James had become more of a partnership than anything else. The passion had long since faded, and Melissa was hungry for something she didn't even know she was missing. Their first kiss was a reckless moment of desire that neither of them could forget. It happened one evening when Grace was out with friends and the house was quiet. Melissa had invited Tom inside under the guise of helping with a project, but once the door was closed, they couldn't stop themselves. The kiss was electric, a rush of emotion neither of them expected. It was a dangerous game, one that neither of them had any experience with, but in that moment, they didn't care. Melissa knew it was wrong, knew that if anyone found out, it would destroy her family, but the excitement of it all consumed her. As the affair continued, Melissa and Tom found themselves sneaking around, stealing moments when they could. They met in secret, careful not to leave any trace of their actions. Each stolen kiss, each secret meeting, felt like a way of escaping the life she had built. She wasn't just a wife and mother anymore. She was a woman who felt desired, who felt wanted, who felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. But as the affair deepened, so did the stakes. Melissa was terrified of being caught, and the guilt began to eat away at her. She knew that if James ever found out, it would destroy everything. He was a good man, a man who didn't deserve to be betrayed, and Grace, their daughter, would be heartbroken. Melissa couldn't bear the thought of ruining her family, but she couldn't stop herself from seeing Tom. He had become more than just an affair to her. He had become her escape. The situation grew more complicated when Melissa found out she was pregnant. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had been careful, or so she thought. But now, everything had changed. She was carrying Tom's child. The thought of telling James, of destroying her perfect family, was unbearable. She knew that if anyone found out, it would shatter everything. She couldn't risk it. Now, Melissa was trapped. She had a secret that she could never tell anyone, and with each passing day the pressure mounted. She had to protect her family, her image, and the life she had so carefully constructed. The lie she had been living had become too big to undo. The affair was one thing, but her pregnancy was another. There was no going back. As weeks went by, the weight of Melissa's secret grew heavier. The pregnancy was impossible to hide any longer. Her body was changing in ways that were too noticeable to ignore. But still, she kept the truth to herself. She wore looser clothes, tried to stay in the shadows, and avoided the people closest to her. Melissa had become a master at keeping up appearances. But even she knew she couldn't maintain this charade for much longer. Each day was a delicate balancing act, trying to shield her family from the inevitable fallout while keeping her own fragile world from collapsing. Her relationship with Tom, once thrilling and secretive, began to show cracks. Tom had become increasingly distant, and Melissa could sense that he was growing tired of the secrecy, of the constant sneaking around. He was no longer as attentive, no longer as interested in meeting in private. What had once felt like a passionate, illicit love affair was now just a reminder of the mess she had made. There were times when he would pull away from her touch, or his kisses would feel absent, as if his heart wasn't in it anymore. Melissa tried to ignore these signs, focusing instead on the practical side of her situation. She couldn't afford to lose him. Not now. Not when the stakes were so high. If Tom ever decided to end things, she would be left with nothing but a growing belly and a shattered reputation. She tried to reach out to him, but each conversation felt more strained. Tom wasn't as eager to see her anymore. It was clear that the weight of their secret was beginning to wear on him too. But that wasn't the worst of it. Melissa's daughter, Grace, had begun to change as well. She had become more withdrawn, more distant, and Melissa couldn't help but wonder if she knew something was wrong. Grace had always been perceptive, the type of teenager who noticed even the smallest changes in the world around her. Melissa had always prided herself on her ability to maintain control, but Grace was slipping away, and Melissa feared she might already sense the storm brewing. Grace had been acting strange, spending more time with her friends and less time at home. Melissa couldn't shake the feeling that Grace was growing more suspicious with each passing day. One afternoon, when Grace came home early from school, Melissa was caught off guard. She was sitting at the kitchen table trying to appear as normal as possible, but the look on Grace's face was impossible to miss. Grace didn't say a word. She just stood there for a moment, her eyes narrowed, studying her mother. There was something different in the air that day, a tension that made the walls of the house feel suffocating. Melissa tried to act as though nothing was wrong, offering Grace a smile that felt too forced. But Grace didn't return the smile. Instead, she quietly made her way upstairs to her room. Melissa's heart sank. Was it possible that Grace had figured it out? Was she starting to put the pieces together? Later that evening after dinner, Grace confronted her mother. The words came out in a rush, sharp and accusatory. "Why is Tom here so much? Why do you two always whisper when I'm around? Are you hiding something from me?" Melissa's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected this moment to come so soon. Not like this. Not in the middle of a dinner that was supposed to be just another ordinary night. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The guilt, the fear, the overwhelming anxiety all paralyzed her. She didn't know how to answer. What could she say? "I'm not hiding anything, Grace," Melissa said, her voice trembling. "You're just being paranoid. Tom's just a friend. You know how he is. He's always here." But Grace wasn't convinced. "Why does he act so different around you? Why do you two look at each other like there's something else going on?" Melissa felt the walls closing in on her. The lies she had been telling for months were beginning to fall apart. Grace wasn't stupid. She was smart, intuitive, and Melissa knew that sooner or later the truth would come out. She couldn't keep lying to her daughter, but she wasn't ready to face the consequences either. The conversation ended awkwardly, with Grace retreating to her room, clearly hurt and confused. Melissa knew she couldn't keep avoiding the truth, but she wasn't ready to confront it yet. She had to buy more time, keep up the facade a little longer, just long enough to figure out a way out of this mess. But as the days passed, the weight of her secret grew heavier, and Melissa could feel the cracks in her perfect world widening. Grace's suspicion was only the beginning. Melissa knew that once she was exposed, once the truth came to light, her world would crumble in an instant. Her perfect family, the life she had worked so hard to create, would be gone. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop the inevitable anymore. The truth was coming, and there was no hiding from it. The walls of Melissa's carefully constructed world were starting to crumble, and she could feel the weight of every passing day bearing down on her. Grace had become more distant, and Melissa couldn't shake the feeling that her daughter was growing increasingly suspicious of her behavior. The once perfect family was unraveling at an alarming pace, and Melissa knew that time was running out. She had tried to maintain her composure, to act as though everything was still normal, but the truth was becoming harder to hide. One afternoon, when Grace came home from school early, Melissa's heart skipped a beat. Grace was holding a small envelope in her hand. An envelope that looked like it contained something important. Grace didn't say a word as she walked past her mother and straight into the living room. Melissa followed her, trying to keep her composure, but her mind raced with questions. What was in that envelope? Was it something that could expose everything? Grace opened the envelope and pulled out a letter, her expression unreadable. Melissa stood frozen in the doorway, watching her daughter as she unfolded the paper. The silence was suffocating, and Melissa could feel her anxiety growing with each passing second. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice calm, but laced with a quiet intensity. "I know," she said, her eyes meeting Melissa's for the first time in days. Melissa's stomach twisted into knots. "Know what, Grace?" she asked, her voice unsteady. She tried to keep the panic from rising, but it was becoming harder to disguise the fear in her voice. Grace held up the letter, her fingers trembling slightly. It was a letter from Tom, one that had accidentally slipped into Grace's hands when he had come to visit. The contents of the letter weren't what Melissa had feared, but it was enough to confirm Grace's suspicions. It was filled with subtle, affectionate words that, while not explicitly revealing the affair, made it clear that Tom had developed feelings for her mother. Grace had connected the dots and realized the truth. "I found this letter in Tom's bag," Grace continued, her voice shaking with emotion. "You've been lying to me. I know you and Tom. You're hiding something from me." Melissa's mind raced, desperately trying to formulate an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. Her heart pounded in her chest as she searched for a way to fix this, to smooth over the cracks that were now painfully visible. She had always been able to control the situation, always been able to steer things in the direction she wanted. But now she was losing her grip on everything, and the only person left to blame was herself. "I'm sorry, Grace," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think." I never meant for you to find out like this." Grace's face was a mixture of confusion, hurt, and betrayal. "How could you do this to me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You're my mom, and you're supposed to protect me. How could you do this behind my back, with my boyfriend?" The pain in Grace's voice was more than Melissa could bear. She had hurt her daughter in the most unforgivable way possible, and now there was no way to take it back. The guilt and shame flooded her, and for a moment she felt as though she might collapse under the weight of it all. But she couldn't break down, not now. She had worked too hard to protect her secret, and she would do anything to keep it from coming out fully. She had to contain the damage to keep this from spiraling out of control. "I never wanted to hurt you," Melissa said, her voice trembling. "It was a mistake. Something that happened when I wasn't thinking clearly. I don't expect you to understand, but I need you to know that I love you, and I'm so sorry." Grace's eyes were filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She just stared at her mother, as though trying to process everything she had just learned. Melissa knew that nothing she could say would fix this. The damage had been done, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The truth would come out. There was no escaping it anymore. As the days passed, the tension in the house grew unbearable. Grace barely spoke to her mother, retreating to her room for most of the day. Melissa, on the other hand, found herself constantly on edge, fearful that Grace might tell James everything. The fear of losing her family, the fear of the consequences, kept her up at night. She couldn't afford to let this secret leak out. Everything she had built, the life she had so carefully curated, would be destroyed. Tom, too, had become more distant. He no longer came over to the house as often, and when he did, his visits were short and uncomfortable. It was clear that the affair was weighing on him as well, but Melissa could see that he wasn't going to stick around for long. He was starting to pull away, and Melissa was terrified that he might break things off entirely. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him, not when he was the only person who understood the complexity of her emotions, the one person who made her feel wanted and desired again. But even as she tried to cling to Tom, Melissa knew deep down that her world was slipping further from her grasp. Her daughter had seen through her lies, and Tom was beginning to pull away. Every day felt like a battle, a desperate fight to keep her life from falling apart completely. But in the end, Melissa knew there was no way to escape the consequences of her actions. The secret she had worked so hard to protect was slipping away, and soon, everyone would know the truth. The tension in the Roberts household had reached a breaking point. Melissa could feel it in every room, in every glance exchanged between her and Grace, in the silence that filled the space where conversation used to flow freely. The walls were closing in on her, and the weight of her secret was no longer something she could easily ignore. Grace's discovery had changed everything. What was once a hidden affair was now a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. Melissa's attempts to patch things up with Grace had been fruitless. Her daughter's coldness was unrelenting, and Melissa's attempts at offering apologies and explanations fell on deaf ears. Grace was no longer the trusting girl she had once been. She had lost faith in her mother, and no matter what Melissa said, that trust seemed impossible to rebuild. Every time Melissa tried to reach out, Grace withdrew further, retreating into herself in ways that were heartbreaking and frustrating. Despite the growing distance between them, Melissa couldn't afford to let Grace slip away entirely. Grace was the one person she could never lose. The thought of seeing her daughter Inae's face filled with disgust and betrayal haunted Melissa's every waking moment. But the truth, the undeniable reality of what had happened, could not be hidden any longer. It was too late to undo the damage. Grace knew the truth. Now the only question that remained was how much longer she could keep it from her husband, James. James had been noticing the changes, though he hadn't yet connected the dots. He could sense the strain in the air, the unspoken tension that seemed to hang over every interaction. Their once comfortable marriage had grown tense, the silence between them louder than any words could be. He had asked Melissa a few times what was wrong, but she had brushed him off with weak excuses. She had been so good at hiding her emotions for so long that it was almost second nature to act as though everything was fine, even when it wasn't. But now, even that act was growing harder to maintain. One evening, James came home earlier than usual. Melissa had been preparing dinner, but the sight of her husband standing in the doorway caught her off guard. There was something in his eyes, something that made her stomach drop. He was quiet at first, but then, as if sensing her unease, he spoke. "Melissa, what's going on?" His voice was calm, but there was an underlying urgency to it, as though he was waiting for her to reveal something. "I know something's wrong. It's been like this for weeks. What is it?" Melissa's heart pounded in her chest. She had tried so hard to keep the truth from him, to keep her carefully constructed life intact. But now, standing there in front of her, James seemed to know something was off. His concern was palpable, but so was the suspicion in his eyes. She couldn't lie to him anymore. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it so clearly wasn't, but the consequences of telling him the truth were unthinkable. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat felt dry, as though her body was betraying her, refusing to speak the truth she had been so desperately trying to suppress. James took a step closer, his eyes softening. "I'm here for you, Melissa. Whatever it is, we can work through it. But I need you to be honest with me." The pressure in Melissa's chest felt suffocating. Her mind raced as she thought of all the ways she could deflect, all the ways she could keep the secret hidden just a little longer. But she couldn't do it. She couldn't keep up the charade any longer. It was time. The truth was coming to the surface, and she was running out of excuses. She began, but the words felt heavy on her tongue. How could she tell him the truth? How could she explain what she had done, the affair, the betrayal of both her husband and her daughter? And how could she face the devastating consequences of those actions? Melissa felt as though the world was closing in on her, the walls pressing in tighter with every passing second. She had lived in fear for so long, but the fear now was more real than ever. The weight of what she had done was unbearable. Before she could say another word, the doorbell rang, breaking the moment. It was a distraction, a moment of relief from the unbearable tension. But it also added to the confusion in Melissa's mind. Who could it be? She glanced at James, who looked just as perplexed. Melissa's heart raced as she made her way to the door, praying that it was anyone but Tom, who had been slipping further away from her with every passing day. When she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't Tom. It was Grace, standing on the doorstep with an unreadable expression on her face. Melissa's heart sank as she saw the envelope Grace was holding in her hand. It was the same envelope from earlier, the one that had revealed Tom's feelings for her. "Mom," Grace said quietly, holding out the envelope. "I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I don't want to be a part of your lies." The words hit Melissa like a slap to the face. She didn't know how to respond. There was nothing she could say that would undo the damage, that would fix what she had broken. Grace's eyes were filled with disappointment, and for a moment, Melissa could only stand there frozen as her daughter turned and walked away. The door closed softly behind Grace, and suddenly, everything felt like it was slipping out of control. Melissa had lost her daughter, and now she was on the verge of losing everything else. She turned back to James, whose face had gone pale. "Melissa," he said softly, his voice trembling. "What is this?" The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The truth had shattered Melissa's world in ways she never imagined possible. Her daughter Grace had walked away, her disappointment and heartbreak etched in every step. James, her husband, was standing in front of her, a silent witness to the unraveling of everything they had built together. The facade of their perfect life, once so carefully maintained, was now in tatters, and Melissa was left standing at the center of the destruction. There was no more hiding, no more pretending that everything was fine. The walls had come down, and there was nothing left to shield her from the consequences of her actions. James didn't speak at first. He simply stood there, his eyes fixed on Melissa with a mix of confusion, hurt, and disbelief. The weight of the moment hung heavily in the air, thick with unspoken questions. Melissa knew that words couldn't undo what had been done, couldn't make the broken pieces of their life fit back together, but she had to try. She had to explain herself, even if she wasn't sure there was any way to make things right. "I'm sorry," Melissa said, her voice barely a whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't know how to stop." She looked at him, but his eyes seemed distant, as though he couldn't even look at her anymore. "I was lost, James. I thought I needed something, someone else, to make me feel alive again." James took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving her. The silence between them was unbearable, each second a reminder of the wreckage she had caused. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice strained. Us, we had everything. Why? Why would you do this to us? To me? To Grace?" The pain in his voice was enough to break her, but Melissa couldn't afford to crumble. Not now. "I don't have an answer for you," she replied, her voice shaking. "I made a terrible mistake. A mistake I can't undo. But I need you to know, James, it was never about you. It was about me. I lost myself, and in trying to find something to fix it, I destroyed everything that mattered." James shook his head, his jaw tightening with frustration. "You don't even understand the gravity of what you've done, do you? You think you can just apologize and everything will go back to normal? You think you can just fix this?" His voice cracked with emotion as he took a step back. "You've broken this family, Melissa. I don't know if we can ever come back from this." Melissa's heart sank at his words, and she felt a sharp pang of regret. She had hurt him in a way that couldn't easily be forgiven, and she could see the reality of it in his eyes. There would be no quick fix, no magical way to repair the damage she had done. She had crossed a line, and now she had to face the consequences. "I don't expect forgiveness, James," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I don't expect you to understand, but I had to tell you. I couldn't live with the lie anymore." James looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched out, thick with the weight of their broken trust. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, the door opened and Grace walked back into the room. She had been gone for hours, and Melissa had almost forgotten she was still part of this shattered equation. Grace's eyes met her mother's, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Grace was holding something in her hand. Another letter. Melissa's stomach churned as she saw it. The letter she had feared Grace would eventually find. The final piece of the puzzle. Grace walked over to the table and laid the letter down in front of them. It was from Tom, the boy who had once been part of their family's circle but had now become an enemy, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. "This," Grace said quietly, "is the letter that proves everything. This is the letter he wrote to you. The one that started all of this." Her voice trembled with the force of the emotions she had been holding back for so long. "And now I don't even know who you are anymore." Melissa's heart ached as she looked at her daughter. Grace was standing there, her expression filled with the kind of pain and anger that no mother ever wants to see in her child. She had lost Grace's trust completely, and there was no way to get it back. The damage was too deep, and Grace's broken heart was a reflection of Melissa's own. James took a deep breath and turned to Grace. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm but gentle. Grace nodded, but her eyes never left her mother. The pain in those eyes was too much for Melissa to bear. "I'm sorry," Melissa whispered again, though the words felt hollow now. They couldn't fix this. No apology could undo what had been done. She had betrayed the people she loved most, and now she had to live with the consequences. In the days that followed, things between them became even more strained. Grace withdrew completely, no longer speaking to her mother except when necessary. She went to her room, staying behind closed doors for most of the day, and when she did emerge, it was with a coldness that cut through Melissa like a knife. James, too, became distant. The anger he had once held in check now boiled over, and the house was filled with the echoes of their painful silence. Their marriage, once solid and dependable, was now hanging by a thread. The truth had exposed the cracks in their relationship, and Melissa wasn't sure if there was any way to repair what had been broken. Melissa tried to reach out, tried to apologize, tried to make things right. But the more she spoke, the further they seemed to push her away. There was no way to undo the damage, and as each day passed, the weight of her actions felt heavier and heavier. The love and trust she had taken for granted had been destroyed, and now she was left with nothing but the consequences of her choices. In the end, Melissa realized that no matter how hard she tried, some things could never be fixed. The secret was out, the betrayal laid bare, and now she had to live with the knowledge that she had irreparably damaged her family. Grace would never see her the same way again, and James, though still present, would never look at her without the stain of betrayal between them. The family she had once known and cherished was no longer hers. She had lost everything, and all she could do now was accept the reality of what she had done. There was no going back.